On the other side, the Reverend Jesse Jackson will show support for the Cook County office. That's at 11 a.m., so more on all that in the Windy City. First, however, President Trump threatening bold action, new action in the fight over border security, saying he's considering shutting down the U.S. border with Mexico, as well as cutting off aid to Central American countries. As we say good morning on a Monday, we have made it to April. No fooling. I'm Bill Hemmer live here in New York City. Sanders got the day off. How you doing? Welcome back.
Happy April.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Bring in spring. I'm Julie Banderas in for Sandra Smith. So the Trump administration making one thing clear to the American people. The president is serious about these threats, so take him at his word. A point that was repeatedly made on the Sunday shows.
It certainly isn't a bluff. You can take the president seriously. This president is looking at the metrics. Secretary Nielsen saying we're in a meltdown. We're at the breaking point.
When the president says he's going to close the border, that is a totally unrealistic boast on his part.
The Democrats will not give us any additional money to do this. They won't give us any additional people. Faced with those limitations, the president will do everything he can. If closing the ports of entry mean that, that's exactly what he intends to do.
The president is calling a crisis at the border. He's threatening to shut down portions of it this week. He has given the order to cut off aid.
Well, we're going to do everything we can to stop it. It's totally absurd.
The president feels like that the only way to control this problem is to move the people from the port of entry to the ungoverned spaces where we need a wall. I will support him.
Well, that's the backdrop for Kevin Corke to begin a brand new week at the White House. Kevin, good morning to you. What are the politics behind the threat to close the border?
Well, frankly, Bill, the White House feels like this is a problem that's being facilitated by just a few countries south of our border. And what this really does is it underscores the enormity of that problem. And the president is calling this a, quote, invasion. Let me take it to Twitter. He's once again talking about it this morning. No surprise there. He said this: Democrats working with Republicans in Congress can fix the asylum and other loopholes quickly. We have a major national emergency at our border, all caps now. Get it done now. The numbers, frankly, Bill, are staggering, with Customs and Border Patrol reporting so-called asylum seekers overwhelming the system, in effect skipping the normal immigration process and jumping in front of the line ahead of tens of thousands who have been waiting and going through the proper process. White House officials and Republicans on Capitol Hill, for that matter, over the weekend, said the president has little choice but to act decisively.
What he's looking at is that 4,000 migrants apprehended in one day recently. We're on track this month for close to 100,000. We have never seen a surge like this.
What are we supposed to do? You have the Mexican government allowing thousands of people to walk all across Mexico. We've had 100,000 people cross the border illegally in March alone. We're on track to over 1 million this year if this keeps up. So Mexico could help more. They should help more.
El Salvador, Guatemala, as you mentioned, among the countries that will now not be receiving the aid that the president had previously earmarked for those particular countries. And by the way, while there's frustration here at the White House, especially as it's related to Democrats, Bill, keep in mind, Republicans did very little heavy lifting on this issue when they had control of both houses of Congress, Bill.
Interesting. What are Democrats saying? We heard from a few of them there about the latest policy announcement there.
Yeah, they are clearly frustrated because they know the president is going to get money to develop a wall. He's going to get the money by taking money from different pots. And that's frustrating for Democrats on Capitol Hill because while they know he will get money for the wall, it doesn't change, at least fundamentally, the immediate future of millions that are still making the dangerous trek to get here.
When the president says he's going to close the border, that is a totally unrealistic boast on his part. What we need to do is focus on what's happening in Central America, where 3 countries are dissembling before our eyes and people are desperately coming to the United States. The president's cutting off aid to these countries will not solve that problem.
There's another issue to consider here.
Another big story to tell you about this morning. Joe Biden now responding to those allegations of inappropriate behavior after a former Nevada politician, Lucy Flores, says Biden placed his hands on her shoulders, then kissed the back of her head during a campaign rally back in 2014. The two were not close at the time. Flores saying she felt violated by the contact, but not sexually assaulted.
I don't believe that it was a bad intention. I'm not in any way suggesting that I felt sexually assaulted or sexually harassed. I felt invaded. I felt that there was a violation of my personal space.
Peter Ducey is live in Washington, D.C. with more. So, Peter, has Joe Biden apologized?
No, but he is now trying to explain, Julie, that physical contact is just part of his style, with a written statement that says, in part, in my many years on the campaign trail and in public life, I have offered countless handshakes, hugs, expressions of affection, support, and comfort. And not once, never, did I believe I acted inappropriately. If it is suggested I did so, I will listen respectfully, but it has never been my intention. And Biden is getting some backup now from another woman who says that she appreciated the time he reached out and touched her. Stephanie Carter, wife of former Defense Secretary Ash Carter, who writes now that her story is different than Lucy Flores, and that, quote, let me state up front that I don't know her, but I absolutely support her right to speak her truth, and she should be like all women believe. But her story is not mine. That Joe Biden in my picture is a close friend, helping someone get through a big day, for which I will always be grateful. And so far, we have not seen or heard from Joe Biden about this. But remember, he is not officially, technically, a candidate for president yet. Julie.
How are other candidates, Peter, digesting all these allegations against Biden?
Based on what they know and what they have heard from Lucy Flores, they're taking her side.
I read the op-ed last night. I believe Lucy Flores, and Joe Biden needs to give an answer.
Should he not run as a result?
That's for Joe Biden to decide. That is their decision about whether or not to run, and it will be up to Democratic voters whether or not to support someone.
I have no reason not to believe Lucy. And I think what this speaks to is the need to fundamentally change the culture of this country.
Many of the Democratic presidential hopefuls are going to be here in Washington, D.C. for the We the People Summit throughout the course of today. So we do expect to get a lot more reaction to Biden today. Julie.
All right. We look forward to it. Peter Ducey, thank you.
Got a lot to go through now. Byron York, chief political correspondent of the Washington Examiner, joins me now. And Byron, good morning to you.
Good morning, Bill.
On the Biden matter, how do you see this developing?
Well, he's going to have to address it in some way. I mean, so far, the vice president, former vice president, has said he had never had any intention to make anyone uncomfortable, any of that. That's perfectly fine for a non-candidate. But if he is going to enter the race, he's going to have to address this. He's going to have to actually take questions about this. Because as you saw, his fellow candidates are not going to cut him any slack. They're going to say they believe Lucy Flores, and it's up to the former vice president to explain himself. So that's got to be the next step in this.
Here is the NBC Wall Street Journal polling on this is pre-weekend story now, Byron. Joe Biden was at 70%, and Bernie Sanders was just below him at 60%. He's a clear front runner.
Absolutely, but he's not in the race yet. I think everybody would say that Joe Biden, once he gets in the race, will probably begin to go down in those polls. It's just what always happens. People look at the person who's not undergoing the scrutiny of a political campaign. They say he looks great, and when he's in the scrutiny, when he's scrapping with everybody else in the field, then his numbers go down. So I think that's kind of an artificial number, because you have these other candidates who are out and about, who are talking, who are taking positions, who are participating in town halls, all of that kind of stuff. You've got that going on, and Joe Biden is just staying off to the side, being Uncle Joe.
This was the talk on the Sunday shows as well. Here's Kellyanne Conway with Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday.
I think Joe Biden has a big problem here because he calls it affection and handshakes. His party calls it completely inappropriate.
So I would imagine, Byron, you're going to get a lot more reaction on this, and depending how Biden responds to it, as you appropriately point out there, it will dictate a lot. Lucy Flores was on CNN over the weekend, and she was asked about her support for Bernie Sanders in 2016. And the question was given to her in a sense that some people will see this as political motivation. And she responded to that in a rather clear way. She's given this great thought, Byron. No clip. Go ahead.
Well, look, the reason, of course, it's all political. I mean, we're in a political campaign. But the reason this is a big deal, we should remember, is this is not the first example we've seen of Joe Biden touching women a lot in public. Actually, the Lucy Flores situation was interesting because it was off camera. Some of these other incidents had been on camera, and you saw the Stephanie Carter, the wife of Ashton Carter, say that what happened was okay with her. But we've had other pictures of Biden touching women, perhaps inappropriately. So if this were one single incident with Lucy Flores that nobody else saw, it would be one thing. But in fact, it fits into a pattern of what the world has observed, and maybe it's just Joe Biden's affectionate, touchy, physical style, and maybe it's something that Democrats are going to judge as inappropriate for one of their candidates.
Right, good to have you on today. Thanks, Byron York. More
Thank you, Bill.
on this forthcoming. Thank you very much. Here's Julie now with more.
Breaking news in the push to get the full Mueller report as Democrats slam William Barr and his release with redactions.
We have a new species of political dinosaurs. It's called the Barr redactyl.
We are now learning Chairman Nadler will actually subpoena for the entire report. Alan Dershowitz is here to react next.
Also, South Carolina police now releasing chilling new images of the moment a college student enters the car of her alleged killer. How confusion over her Uber may have led to her death.
And Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx, the subject of competing rallies in Chicago today over the handling of the Jussie Smollett case. We'll have the head of the police union leading the rally at 9:30. I'll talk to him then.
In Chicago, you never know what's really happening behind the scenes, but our antennas are up, and there's.
When their AH-1Z helicopter crashed. It happened at the Marine Air Station in Yuma Saturday night. Their names are being withheld until their families are notified. An investigation now underway to determine the cause of the crash.
From the very beginning, we've said what we're saying now, which is Mr. Barr gets to handle this. That's how the law works. And Mr. Barr has made it clear that he's going to release it to Congress before he shows it to us. That's his decision. So we're going to let the system work.
Mick Mulvaney over the weekend, acting White House staff, reacting to William Barr's decision on the Mueller report. Meanwhile, we're getting word just this past hour, House Judiciary Committee plans to subpoena the entire report this week as Mr. Barr plans to release a redacted version sometime before mid-April. That will miss a deadline that Democrats have been looking for. That's tomorrow, April 2nd. Alan Dershowitz wrote the book, The Case Against the Democratic House Impeaching Trump. And, sir, good morning to you. First, on the subpoena matter here, do you see this gaining traction on Wednesday, as right now we're learning about it?
No, I think even if Barr were hypothetically to refuse to issue anything, there would be no legal basis for a court to compel him to do that. Let me give you a shoe on the other foot hypothetical. Let's go back to Comey announcing that he was not going to indict Hillary Clinton because there was insufficient proof of crime. And let's assume that the Republicans had information that there's a report within the Justice Department that says she's extremely careless in the way she handled it. And there was an effort by Republicans to subpoena that report. First of all, every Democrat would be up in arms, saying you don't subpoena reports about people who have not been indicted. That's not the way the Justice Department works. Second, the court would say, no, this is within the executive prerogative. How is this different? Sure, this is a special counsel. The special counsel, under the rules, has an obligation to file a report with the Attorney General. There's nothing in the rules that require the Attorney General to make the report public, particularly if it contains information critical of people who are not indicted. So this is a political issue. This is a media issue.
Yeah,
this is not a legal issue.
Let me come back to that point here. Whether it's April 2nd or April 12th, does 10 days matter that much to someone like you?
Well, it matters a lot because we need to have the Attorney General redact it to make sure there's no national security classified material, no grand jury minutes, and I would submit nothing that is critical of people who have not been indicted and haven't had an opportunity to respond. Remember, this report is inherently one-sided. They didn't listen to testimony from people who are favorable to the subjects. They didn't have cross-examination. And so that's why the Justice Department generally doesn't go beyond saying no indictment. That's why the world, Democrats and Republicans alike, condemned Comey when he said, I'm not going to indict Hillary Clinton, but she engaged in conduct that was extremely careless. Everybody said that was wrong. Why is this different?
Yeah. On this political question here, it seems the Democrats on the committee are preparing their rebuttal, depending on the redactions, no matter how many there are, to allege that there was a cover-up on behalf of Bill Barr and the Department of Justice. You can read between the lines and a lot of the commentary on that already. I want to go back to Friday afternoon. This was Bill Barr's letter to Jerry Nadler. He talked about working with the special counsel office, assisting us in the redactions, trying to keep sources and methods private. Our progress is that I will report by mid-April, if not sooner. Then he writes, there are no plans to submit the report to the White House for a privilege review. Does that surprise you, or is that expected?
No, it does surprise me. Generally, there is review. Remember, you can't take back privileged information once it's made public. What Barr might do is release it to select members of Congress who are sworn under oath not to release it to the public, release it at the same time to the White House, let the White House make application for executive privilege, then let a decision be made about whether executive privilege applies. This rush to release is understandable. The American public wants to see this report. They're curious. But the law has to be complied with. And the law generally protects subjects of investigations who haven't been indicted. It protects them by law when it's grand jury material. It's a crime to release grand jury material without the approval of the courts. And it's even a crime to release it to Congress without the approval of the court. So the law has to be complied with, and the shoe on the other foot test has to be applied. Everybody thinking about this must think about this as if this were a Democrat who were being investigated and the Republicans were seeking to get the material. And what would each side be saying, and what would the courts be saying? That's the test that has to be applied if we're not going to have partisan hypocrisy.
Need a quick answer here. When the Mueller report goes up to Congress, when we all see it, is the legal question over, and is it just a political question that exists after that point?
I think it's just a political question, unless there's information in the report that results in impeachable or criminal conduct. But I think otherwise it's completely political and media, and that's what's been pushing this.
Alan Dershowitz live in Florida today. Thank you, sir. We'll speak again. Thanks for your time. Here's Julie.
Thank you.
A Colorado sheriff says that he is willing to go to jail rather than enforce a proposed new gun bill. What state lawmakers are pushing for and why he is so opposed.
It has so many constitutional questions. I can't in good faith go forward and carry out a law that I believe puts constituents' constitutional rights at risk.
Suspect killed a college student who mistakenly confused his car for the Uber that she had called. Chilling new images capture the scene moments before she got into the car early Friday morning. The victim, Samantha Josephson, was found dead just 14 hours later.
We believe we don't have a statement or any evidence that suggests this other than our observations on the video. We believe that she simply mistakenly got into this particular car thinking it was an Uber ride.
A vigil for Samantha was held last night in Columbia, South Carolina. The suspect, Nathaniel David Rowland, faces kidnapping and murder charges.
A Colorado sheriff says he will refuse to endorse a so-called red flag bill up for debate in the state's legislature. The proposed measure would let a judge confiscate a firearm from anyone deemed a potential danger to themselves or others. Alicia Cunha is live in Denver this morning with us. So, Alicia, this sheriff is willing to go to jail over this?
That's right, Julie. Yeah, Weld County Sheriff Stephen Ream says if the Extreme Risk Protection Order bill becomes law in the state of Colorado, he will not enforce it because he says it could be a violation of the Constitution. Here's the sheriff.
They could sentence me to my own jail, fine me, or just hold a contempt hearing to further this argument along. And honestly, I think any of those possibilities are out there.
Sheriff Reams is not alone. Half the counties in the state, 32 of them, have taken positions against the proposed law. Sheriffs in those counties say if a judge determines someone is dangerous, they will not confiscate their guns. If passed, the law would allow family members or others to seek approval from a judge to take firearms away from persons who they consider a danger to themselves or others. One of the bill's sponsors is the father of a man killed in the 2012 Aurora Theater shooting. It has led to a standoff of sorts between lawmakers and the governor's office and sheriffs around the state. The Colorado Sun reported that Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser was heard in a recording saying any sheriff who refuses to enforce the law should resign. Again, here's Sheriff Reams.
Obviously, the Attorney General is entitled to his own opinion. He's an independently elected official, just like I am. His interpretation of the red flag bill is his interpretation, and I have my own interpretation of it.
The sheriff is also not a law-making position in a state. It's a law enforcement division.
The bill has passed in the state Senate. It now goes back to the House, Julie, where it's expected to pass. Julie.
All right, Alicia Cunha, thank you so much.
There's a lot of news today in Chicago. The police union there taking their battle against the state's attorney directly to her office in a matter of hours. There was a protest expected after 16 charges were dropped against Jussie Smollett. The president of the union, Kevin Graham, is going to talk to us about that coming up in a moment here. Plus, there's this.
I know it's going to be difficult with Nancy Pelosi, but what I'm going to focus on is how do you drive down costs? The Democrats constantly focus on access. The problem is the cost of health care is too high in this country.
Chapter in the fight over Obamacare. Republicans say it is time action needs to start. But will Nancy Pelosi stand in their way? And do they even have a place to replace it?
Also, the madness in March is behind us because it's April. How's your bracket doing?
How are the
Final Four is set, Julie. Who's in and who's out? I mean, some really great games over the weekend.
And surprise upsets, right?
That's right, a lot of them.
Howard Schultz Town Hall. The former Starbucks CEO speaks out on a potential
Dueling rallies in that city after prosecutors dropped charges against Jussie Smollett. The first rally, led by Jesse Jackson, kicks off in about 90 minutes. Then an hour after that, Chicago Police Union holds its own rally. The president of the Fraternal Order of Police in Chicago is Kevin Graham. We're going to talk to him in a moment. But first, the latest from Matt Finn on the streets of Chicago on a Monday. Hey, Matt, good morning.
Bill, good morning. Those dueling demonstrations about to happen here in the heart of the city in the Loop. The Chicago Police Union, with some 15,000 members, plans on protesting Kim Foxx at her office right here. They are protesting against her for the way that she handled the Smollett case and what they allege is a history of being anti-police. But before that protest, there's a rally in support of Kim Foxx right here next door at the United Methodist Church, being led by Jesse Jackson, clergy, activists, and other elected officials. Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx being heavily criticized, but still defending her office's decision to drop the Smollett charges. The president has called for a federal review of the case. The Illinois Prosecutors Bar says Foxx misled the public. The National Association of District Attorneys says prosecutors should not take advice from politically connected friends of the accused. But Kim Foxx responded to all of that criticism in an op-ed published in the Chicago Tribune, writing in part, quote, "Since it seems politically expedient right now to question my motives and actions and those of my office, let me state publicly and clearly that I welcome an outside, non-political review of how we handled this matter. For a variety of reasons, including public statements made about the evidence in this case, my office believed the likelihood of securing a conviction was not certain." The Chicago Police Union fired right back, writing in part, quote, "The article to us is a desperate attempt to justify a complete breakdown of her office to fulfill its obligations. The CPD concluded after an exhaustive investigation that Mr. Smollett faked a hate crime. A grand jury returned a 16-count indictment. It's Mrs. Foxx's duty to prosecute this crime. She refused to do so. Her refusal to do so has generated national condemnation by the public, elected officials, and even members of her own profession." And this morning, a former Illinois appellate judge today says she will personally petition the courts to assign a special prosecutor to investigate how Kim Foxx handled this case. Bill.
Thank you, Matt. Matt Finn, they're live in Chicago. Julie.
All right, well, let's bring in the president of Chicago's Fraternal Order of Police, Kevin Graham. Thank you very much for talking to us. A busy day in Chicago.
Thanks for having us. We started this because we didn't feel that the text messages between the prosecutor and a private attorney in California were were legal. And so that's why we asked for an investigation more than 2 weeks ago. We are having this rally not just because of the Smollett case, it's because there's a history of not prosecuting cases or not prosecuting them fully, having low bonds on people. We are turning people back out onto the streets, and that's pretty hard when you're using the court system as a penalty box like a hockey game.
So when
we need to...
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. You mentioned low bonds. I mean, so basically, Smollett paid $10,000, and that was, you know, that's all he ended up paying and some community service. Do you believe the $10,000 was too low of a bond?
Sure. I mean, let's just look at the cost. The mayor of the city
$130,000
gave the cost at
which he now is expected to pay, right? Do you think that's enough?
Well, certainly that's a start. We have questions as to how this case was handled. I heard this morning that one of Mr. Smollett's attorneys said they didn't ask for what they got in terms of, and I don't want to use the word sentence, but a deal, and that it was offered by the prosecutor's office, which we're still scratching our head as to how you can come up with that.
I got to ask you.
We have a lot more questions. Yes.
Kim Foxx, the state attorney. I want to talk to you about the op-ed that she wrote in Chicago Tribune to the public, basically, explaining her decision. I also want to remind our viewers that initially she said that she recused herself in the decision-making process due to her relationship with Smollett's family. She later recounted that story. She said that she did not recuse. Here is what she says in part. Falsely reporting any crime in itself a crime. Falsely reporting a hate crime is so much worse, and I condemn in the strongest possible way anyone who does that. Listen to those words. I condemn that. Wouldn't the strongest condemnation of falsely reporting a hate crime be criminal charges and a conviction? Because as Fox also points out in her op-ed, false claims harm the victims of actual crimes.
Absolutely. And this case should have stood trial. We felt that the case was solid and that we would have gotten a conviction, and we wouldn't be having these discussions, and there wouldn't be the outrage and the protests that we have going on today, or the counter-protest, which is bewildering to me why you're having a counter-protest when all we're looking for is justice. I think many of these people who are having this counter-protest, that's what they've been looking for in Chicago, justice, and they should be standing behind the police and the FOP.
Yeah. Smollett's alleged crime, by the way, is considered a Class 4 felony. For those at home that don't know what a Class 4 felony is, well, it actually is the least serious category, surprisingly, and it actually falls in the same category as falsely pulling a fire alarm in a school, okay? A high school student pulling a fire alarm in a school, all right? Who didn't have that happen when they were growing up? I didn't have false hate crimes reported, but I definitely remember those. They are routinely resolved with no jail time. I don't know how you can actually compare these two crimes.
You know what? There is the Cook County, the Illinois law system can be very complicated. We don't think it's being applied, and it needs improvement. I was in Springfield last week asking for improvements in the law. We certainly would like to see the federal government look at this case, particularly when it comes to the envelope that was sent with the accusations that Mr. Smollett was going to be harmed. We feel that that is a good case for the FBI to look at, and that the U.S. attorney could prosecute if they find the facts and circumstances to be what the Chicago police found.
Kim Foxx says in her op-ed, I welcome an outside review of how we handled the Jussie Smollett case. I got to ask you, how do you think an outside investigation led by the FBI will result in appeasing the public, or will it? Or will these rallies continue and protests until they see there's more justice done here?
Well, certainly, I have gotten emails and phone calls from around the country feeling that justice was not done. So I do think that the state's attorney's office can do a better job, and if they don't, I think that they're going to find more and more law enforcement agencies, because I know that there are additional law enforcement agencies meeting this week to discuss her actions and her office in failure to prosecute some of the crimes that are going on in Cook County. So I do think that she's going to have a problem if it isn't addressed, and I do believe the proper avenue at this point would be the federal government investigating her in this case.
Do you think she should resign?
Well, I have a board of directors meeting tomorrow, and that question will come up. That's a decision that the board of directors is going to make. I certainly do have my own opinion, but my opinion will wait until after I meet with the board tomorrow.
All right, let us know. Kevin Graham, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming on this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. 20 minutes before the hour now. March Madness is over because it's April. Final curtain falling on the #1 overall seed in the tournament. Michigan State knocks off Duke 68-67.
Oh, boy.
That's a really great game last night. The Spartans move on. They played so well. Sets the stage for the Final Four. Virginia is the only #1 before, right? Michigan State's been there several times. Virginia hasn't been there, I think, 20 years.
Rest. This issue and the way it needs to be dealt with. So hopefully those types of messages will get across the line to Congress and they'll actually do something about this.
Here's the tweet from the president a bit earlier. No, this was on Sunday. The Democrats are allowing a ridiculous asylum system and major loopholes to remain as a mainstay of our immigration system. Mexico is likewise doing nothing. A very bad combination for our country. Homeland Security is being so very nice, but not for long. So let's see what changes on that. I think Lindsey Graham was making the point at the port of entries. They had to take so many personnel in there to handle the influx that you allow other parts of the border to go unguarded, and that's an issue. Wanted to get your reaction on this Chick-fil-A story, too, that's sort of getting a lot of steam across the country now. Here's what you said a few days ago. You said the city of San Antonio